And if you give me, sometimes we have these cases that come along where, Chas and Kala, they got married, they've been married 3 weeks and they're, reaching out for a divorce already, 6 months, a couple's been struggling for 2 years, right? Or my favorite cases, which I have some, when people come to me before, while they're dating or when they're engaged, before they're married. And there's so much amazing work that we can do there. But there's a certain point where the amount of pain that has built up makes it very, very difficult to deal with the issue. And I would say that with any problem, okay? When we come to a place where a guy is caught for molestation, okay, it's generally not his first time. It's not the first year we're coming to it and we're like, this is new, how do we fix it?
Yeah.
But there's a life of stuff that's been going on.
Where life takes a spin. Join the fun, let the talk begin.
Hello and welcome to Hakol Sababa. It's been a while since our last episode, but we have a special guest today, Dr. Ariel Hochster, who is my friend and neighbor over here, and he is a school and clinical psychologist.
That's right.
And we have some fascinating things that we want to talk about. But I'm going to start out by asking you to give me some of your backstory, just so everyone can get to know you a little bit and where you come from and what makes you tick.
Sure. Maybe I'll start off with a bracha too, because I feel like that's all the things that we're doing here, and hopefully kind of connect with everything we're doing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen.
So, my name is Ariel Hochster. I'm originally from New York. I like to say my story starts a lot before that. My mom's from Alabama, actually, which you're from South Africa, but there's a certain amount of Southern hospitality and not so much
South Africa too. Southern hospitality, right?
So very much, yeah. When I was thinking of when I was listening to a previous podcast you did, so it was I was very much thinking of that, and some of that was what had me reach out to you and based on the comment on your previous podcast. So first of all, thanks for having me here. This is a pleasure to be here. So my mom's from Alabama. She comes with this kind of like warmth. Both my parents are Bali Tshuva. My father's from New York also. And so while I grew up in yeshivas my whole life, I've always felt like a Bal Tshuva in terms of hashkafa and like this hashkafa, that hashkafa. Like we didn't really know. We just knew like, I guess to give you an example, my grandfather, so every week he would read the parsha in English and, they would make Kiddush and then, Friday night. And then after that, they would go to the mall and they thought they had the best of both worlds. They could, do whatever they want and they had Shabbos and whatever. And
sounds a lot like where I grew up.
But, yeah. And my grandfather was a pillar of the community. He helped plant the trees in Alabama and for the shul, and he was a big part of it until his passing. But my mom basically became from Thurenzi's Y, which is a Kirov organization. And my father also, this is a longer story, but my grandfather was on my father's side, both my grandparents were Holocaust survivors. My grandfather decided on his own at 13 that he was going to get out. He got out on the second to last or last kinder transport out of Germany, and then basically came to England, contacted relatives in America, and was able to get visas to get his parents out. So he came to America, built his own business, raised himself outside the Jewish community, and so Judaism was, not totally lost, but they I have a couple of tunes from him, but they went to a conservative shul, and then my father found Judaism through an Orthodox, minyan that was happening in the basement of a conservative shul. That's kind of my background. We didn't know so much Torah, but there was a lot of heart, there was a lot of passion. Both my parents found this, and there was a deep, love and respect for Torah and for Eretz Yisrael. And so that's a lot of, I feel like that's a big, part of me. Over the course of my life, I sort of was a little bit able to chart my own course. I went in elementary school, I went to a Chavis Chaim, which is a little bit more of a yeshivish place. And then in high school, I went to a place called Rambam, which is what I would say is a very responsible high school, one that took activism very seriously and the world very seriously, and was really based off of the Shittas of the Rambam, and they had good academics, and it was kind of like at that point he was picking, was I going to go to college or not, and my parents, who thought college was important, I guess ingrained that into me, and so I ended up taking that track, and then from there I went, so from my elementary school there were only a couple of guys, a few guys who went to Rambam, and then from Rambam there were only I think one other guy who came to me. I went to Yeshiva Kotel in Eretz Yisrael, so took also sort of my own route, and then from Hakotel I went to Landers, which is also not something so that's very common. So I sort of have plotted my own route, and so I take things from a lot of different places, but I'm not sort of held to
very boxed.
I'm not so boxed in, and that's I think that's a big part of who I am, and it's a big part of what I bring to the table, and that sort of vision continued when I went to graduate school in Elizabeth, New Jersey, to Kean University, which is obviously a non-Jewish university, but they were super accommodating, and while I did live a somewhat sheltered life while I was in yeshiva, so once I moved into psychology, I started opening up my world to anybody that I could meet, and I tried to take on the most complex cases and places that I could go. So I was fortunate to work in prisons and hospitals, and it really not only opened up my world, but actually deepened my spiritual connection. And I think spiritually I grew tremendously there, because the world, there's a lot of people lost out there and looking for direction. And the principles that I had kind of learned as truth that I didn't know what it meant, it was like, oh, well, actually, if you go out into the world and apply bad principles, if there's no discipline in health, your health falls apart. If there's no discipline in your relationships fall apart. If there's no discipline in your purpose and meaning in this world, so you end up being lost.
Yeah.
And so as I reached further out into the world, the principles that I grew up with became very, very significant.
Hey there, this is Charles Bear. I'm your host on Hakol Sababa. I hope you're enjoying our content, and if you'd like to see more content like this and better content, maybe you can do me a favor. If you're on YouTube, please can you just go and click that subscribe button, and if you're on Spotify, click the follow button under my podcast. The more people that I've got following and subscribing to my channel, the more the algorithm wants to promote my content and show it to more people, and success breeds success. It snowballs. Also, when we're looking for guests to come onto the show, it's a lot more of an incentive for them to come on the show if we got, for example, 100,000 subscribers or something modest like that. So if you can just do me a solid, it'll take you a second and it'll cost you nothing. Just go and click subscribe, follow, whatever it is, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
But I really feel like I learned from people everywhere, and I found in prisons, I found inspiring people and incredible stories, and
Tell us a couple of those stories.
So how intense do you want?
As intense as you feel like sharing.
I'll tell you one incredible story. There was one woman that I had worked with. She was had a rough background, kind of ran away from home, ended up hanging out with friends who were doing a lot of drugs, and she got into drugs and started selling tremendous amounts of heroin, cocaine, hard drugs, crystal meth, so she was actually engaged to a guy who was also a drug dealer. She had met not so long before, and the day they were supposed to get engaged, he never showed up. Turned out he was arrested and put in jail, but they clung onto the relationship for 20 years with him in and out of prison, which is like you see like a person who's dedicated to something. And so this person, one of the stories that I remember she told me,
there's something really special about him, that she's hanging on for this guy who's in jail, and nonetheless she wants to hang out for him.
So there's a mix of codependency also, but not totally also, because one example, this was like an incredible story. She had a friend who was also a dealer, and that friend basically ran out of money, had nothing left, and so she put up an advertisement selling her child for drugs, on the market.
Selling what?
Her child for drugs on the market.
I thought you said that, and I was like,
Yeah. It's hard to
oh my word.
So she's seeing that thing, seeing that advertisement. She was like, "That's crazy. I better buy her before somebody else does." And she did. She ended up buying this child. I forgot how much she said, but how many bags of what. But she purchased this child, and she raised this child as her own child, and the child had, as you can imagine, an interesting life. And this woman was actually never, I think, the only drug dealer I've ever worked with that was never caught. She was close a bunch of times, but like her dedication to this child and raising this child and making sure that this child was going to be okay and not just left.
So she was never caught. How did she come to you?
So this particular person, I met her in the nursing home. She actually, so I stopped working in that nursing home about 3 years ago. So she had, and she passed away maybe 2 years ago or so, I heard. But so I met her in the nursing home, but just to see that this was like a hardened person, that she used to mess with the police, and she used to, she wasn't afraid of anything. She like nothing. I mean, she, whatever. The story gets crazier, but basically she raised this child, and just hearing this story of the dedication of this person to raising a child that wasn't even her own, but somebody who was just, left out.
It's such a crazy thing. Like it's like that has got to be one of your classic cases of nuance. Like, here's somebody who you look at their CV and you say, this is a bad person, and then they have chesed on another human being like
absolutely.
that.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I've had clients who supported themselves through prostitution, and clients who I had one client who was kidnapped by his father was like was a mayor or something in which country was it, in Africa? But he was basically he was a politician, and he was a wealthy politician. He was paying people off, doing all kinds of illegal things, whatever. And he didn't like that his wife was basically on the verge of getting him into trouble. So he basically took the kids and came to America. And so I had one of his children as a client. So you get to see a lot of incredible stories, but you can't just write somebody off. I remember one of the stories that was actually most, really, really impactful for me is one of my first internships in psych graduate school. I had a client who, I was working at the Queens County Courthouse, and they would bring in people from Rikers Island. You've probably heard of.
I don't know what Rikers
It's like a very famous jail in America that closed, I think, not so long ago because of all kinds of issues, and I think Trump plans to open it up again. But he came in for the interview, and this was an interview for competency. So they'd have people who committed some kind of crime, they were arrested for it, and so the judge says, "Well, is this person really competent to stand trial for his actions?" And so we went to interview him, and it was myself. I was like sitting on the side. I wasn't really doing anything yet, but my supervisor and an Asian psychologist as well, and then we were going to interview him. And so he sits down, and he's this humongous guy, and the biceps the size of my head. I'm not even joking.
Yeah.
And I remember he sat down like with this like stern like about him. And my supervisor says, "Good morning, sir. You're here for this, particular crime, and we want to interview you, if that's okay with you." And he goes, "I don't want to talk." My supervisor is like, "Okay, you're not required to, but we just have to write a note to the judge that says that you don't want to talk. But can I ask why you don't want to talk?" And so the guy goes, "It's my birthday, And this was the first day. This was a guy who was accused of murder, actually. And it was my first time. I remember walking in that day, and you go through like the security at the Queens County Courthouse, And I remember thinking, like, I'm going to meet a guy who was potentially a murderer. And, like, I remember, like, just running through that in my mind over and over again. Like, what is a murderer like? What is... And when he said that, I was like, oh, yeah. He might have, I don't know whether in the end he was convicted or not, but if it's your birthday, that means you were born. If you were born, you had a mother. If you had a mother, you had a father. If you had a mother and father, you had a story. You came from somewhere, you went through things, and you're here at this spot now where, unfortunately, you know, society...
Did you say this out loud?
This is what I'm thinking. This is what I'm thinking, that I didn't say it to him, but it hit me that he was a person, a human being with a story, you know, and that opened my mind from, I'm not just talking to a potential murderer, you know, somebody who potentially murdered somebody. I'm talking to a human being, you know, and you know, I recently heard an amazing quote from Haviv Redinger. I don't know if you know who he is.
Yeah, sure.
So he's amazing. He said, and this is really the maybe historical version of, you know, of what I would say psychologically, is that he said that whenever you're in a debate, an argument with somebody, if the person you're debating is an idiot, you haven't done your homework, right? And my version of that is everybody has a story, and if the story that somebody's telling you doesn't make sense, it means you haven't listened enough, right? And that's going to apply...
Are you saying that nobody ever makes stupid arguments?
Not that you disagree with the argument. If the argument doesn't make sense to you.
Yeah, but if, you know, if somebody comes up with an argument that is obviously incoherent, such as somebody who will say, the first thing that popped into my mouth is that the Twin Towers attack was a false flag Mossad operation, and it was a glorious victory for Islam.
Yeah.
And coming out of the same person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, is that somebody that you just haven't understood properly, or is that just an idiot?
So you could argue with him, and you're not going to go anywhere. Or you can ask him where he got his information from and why he thinks that. And you would get a story that if you listen long enough, it would start to make sense. And if we extrapolate that outwards even further, right? So if I sometimes give this example, to clients, and this is based on the work of Dr. Chaim Gano, who's a child psychiatrist. Who was amazing.
I know of him through the Faber and Maslish books.
So he's amazing. So, imagine the scenario for a second. You're at the mall with your little child, right? And they have those 5 shekel machines or 10 shekel machines, whatever they are, to get a little ball, a super bouncy ball, and like he's begging you to get it, so you get it from him, and you send him you get it home from the mall. The next day he goes to school, and as you're picking up from school, he's coming towards the car, and the ball bounces out of his hand and it goes down the drain, down a sewer, and your son is running into the street, and he wants to open the sewer and he wants to go in there, and and maybe you see the parent screaming, it's 5 shekel, it's not a big deal, we'll get you a new one, we have to get you out of the street, and the child's holding on to the, to the drain, and like the mother or father drags the child away and like straps them into the car, and, what just happened there? And the answer is the parent doesn't really know. But what the parent doesn't know is that when the child went to school that day and saw their best friend, it turned out their best friend also had gotten a bouncy ball the same day. And they spent their whole recess looking at the 2 balls and the colors and the things like that, and they talked about how this is going to be the symbol of their friendship, and this is going to be connect them forever, and they're just going to,
context,
and this is going to be, they're going to be ball friends forever, and they're never going to let go of this, and whatever. And, they spend the whole day talking about it, and during class they're passing notes, where are you going to keep your ball, and, and then the second recess they're thinking about where they're going to store when they get older, and who they're going to pass it to with their children. And then they're leaving school that day, and the ball goes down the drain. Yeah. And it's no longer a ball. This is the representation of their future, of their friendship, of so much that in a 24-hour period, a child, thought of and shared with a friend. And when this goes down the drain, all of that future and desire and dreams goes down the drain. And the fears of, what's my friend going to say? Can we still be friends? Is this going to last? It comes up. Now, who's right? The parent's right that the child can't be in the street. The parent's right that the child is in danger. The parent needs to do something to protect the child. But if the parent has no understanding of where the child comes from, so then the likelihood of the parents sending the child into an emotional spiral because they don't know the story is very, very high, right? And
not every child will be able to express that to his parents.
And not every child can express that. And not every, forget about children, right? You have a fight with a friend, or you have even more so an enemy. The more dissimilar somebody is from you, the more of a story that there is there. And if we take the same principle, to marriage, you have two people who come together, they love each other, they know each other, but then they move into the same house and one person does something and the other one panics and freaks out. And they can either say, this person's crazy, or they can say what Rabbi Ben Zion Schaefer says is the most important phrase in marriage, which is not "I love you," it's not "I'm sorry," it's that's interesting. This is a perfectly sane, rational person. I even married them. I was convinced enough to marry them. Why are they, standing on the kitchen table screaming when I got home? And if you take a moment to calm yourself down, you might see that there's a spider in the house. You might see that there's something in the house. And if you help them out and sit them down and get a drink, and you're prepared to listen, it's the point where their story makes sense. And you don't have to agree with it. You can disagree. You can say, I would act totally different, but it's the point where they make sense that you now, understand them. It's the point where, you understand them enough to work with them.
I hear that, and I agree with that under certain circumstances, but is that actually something that you can do with everyone? Would you do that with Yahya Sinwar's Yemachshmo? Let's try and understand him. I don't understand you. I just want to kill you.
Yeah. So it's a good question. It's a good question. And at the beginning of after October 7th, my university put out a statement that said, we are sorry of the loss of life in Israel and Gaza. And my university wasn't so, that's not even a bad comment for an American university, right?
Yeah.
And
it's as sanitized as you can get.
It got a little bit worse when, some of the students wrote a letter, and the university I went to had a huge Holocaust research center. And the president of the university said, we're on the lookout for discrimination, and we've increased police presence. And if you need support, you can go to the Holocaust Genocide Library for resources. And everybody's like, you're saying if we feel scared of genocide, we should go back and read about other genocides we have to live through? What are you saying? And I wrote an article that was somewhat widely circled in different groups of early professionals. And one of the things that I said was, I believe in rehabilitation. I have done rehabilitation. I've seen rehabilitation. And in this case, I don't feel like it's appropriate. And I'll tell you why, and then I'll comment on your question. Rehabilitation can happen when a person is lost, when a person is, even the Gemara says that, nobody sins unless a ruach shtus enters inside them, right? So you're at home and things are going, your kids are making a mess, whatever, and you get overwhelmed and you scream, right? You don't want to scream at your children. You don't want to hurt these relationships. You do it because you're overwhelmed, because you're overstimulated, or underfed, undernourished, overtired, etc.
Kind of heat of the moment stuff.
And so rehabilitation happens when something is not ideologically in line. When it's what we call ego dystonic. It's not really what I believe in. It's just this is how I'm acting. And what my article was saying was, so I don't know if it's appropriate here because this is ideological, but I would say that like, if I listen till I totally understand them, first of all, so if I've listened to everything and the answer is they want to kill me, so then I still have to take practical steps. Just because I met people who were amazing in prison doesn't mean they necessarily don't need to be in prison. Now, I would say that America has, we know that America has a terrible prison system because the recidivism rates are really high and rehabilitation is really low. And we know there's other countries.
Are there other places where
there are other countries, Germany, Sweden, I think El Salvador, of all places, recently opened up a humongous prison where they teach people trades, and they apparently have had tremendous success. And how you do it is complicated.
Yeah.
So I was positing that perhaps in a place where somebody's ideologically motivated, so then rehabilitation is not appropriate. Now, Javier Redinger, what he said on this thing, and he says something really interesting. He says that Hamas, their spiritual, heritage, if you take it back 3 generations, where their ideology comes from, is actually the same place that like the UAE and other places come from. And I forgot the name of the theologian who they came from, but he was teetering between 2 different paths, and they took the radical path of kill us. But his argument is we can't just. I mean, we could kill all of them if we had to, but what he argues is anytime you want somebody to change, you need to understand their story and what path is available for them. You can't just say, you should be like me, my path is better. That doesn't work. It never works. Mm-hmm. The GPS, whenever you start, it says, you are on the fastest route, and that's because the fastest route is from starting wherever you are. Right? And you're different than other people. So what he says is that there is competing stories within fundamental Islam that come from the same source that was teetering in 2 different directions, and potentially it could move in the direction of them not being genocidal. And so he says the only way that we can help them escape their story, because right now their story is, it makes it impossible for them and it makes it impossible for us. If the only way is they want to kill us and there's nothing else, so then there's no option but we have to defend ourselves with whatever that means. But if there's a part of their story that says, well, you could kill the Jews or you could be brothers with the Jews and work with the Jews, and there are countries that that have joined the Abraham Accords.
Yeah. So
what he's actually doing is what I'm doing here in psychology. He's looking and saying, what did you really want? Where does this come from? Let's understand your story, and maybe there's another path, right? And understanding the story of that path is so important, because if you don't know the story, there's no way you can argue with anyone, because either they're an idiot or you're uneducated, which might be the same thing, right? So is that possible in this situation? I don't know. I sometimes wonder. Everybody differentiates between Hamas and the Palestinians, and they talk about human shields. And to me, it doesn't sound like a case of human shields. Like, these people are putting themselves in harm's way. So in some ways, it's not like, human shield is when I hold somebody in front of me, so that way, as a hostage. But in this case, the hostages are putting themselves in front of them. And I don't know what percentage, so I can't say what, I don't know.
Yeah, and again, I think it's difficult to say that like a population of 1 to 2 million people is monolithic.
Right.
There are people who are like fully on board with October 7, and there are people who were like, well, okay, it's there's the whole spectrum of people, and the people who are now rejecting Hamas are, it looks to me like they're just rejecting Hamas because they're starting to lose, and because they're suffering and they want to stop suffering. But if Hamas had won, they would have been perfectly happy with everything. Right. So it's just a sort of a practical thing. But nonetheless, there's an opportunity there to drive that wedge in between them.
Yeah, and the truth is, I don't know their story, and I don't know how many people do, and it could be they don't really know their story either, because they've been brainwashed from a young age, and when a 15-year-old picking up an AK-47, how much did I know about my heritage and why I was picking my path, and I feel like it's only been in the last 10 years of my life, I'm now 35, that I've been really thinking about what path I'm on and why I'm on this path, and understanding what I'm doing.
Well, that's actually, like, I heard a quote, and I don't remember who it was or what the exact words of the quote were, but it was something along the lines of, if you believe what you believe because you were born into it, then you haven't thought about it.
Right.
Then you haven't. Then it wasn't ever a decision. And
right.
Then you're just sort of drifting along with whatever the flow is.
Right. And if you don't know, I would say, like, if we use that, in terms of trauma, if we use that in terms of almost anything that people come to therapy for, the things that people come to me for therapy are generally not the problems; they're the symptoms, right? This, and I was going to pull an example, but it's true in almost every case. The things that we're doing that are problematic are things that we're doing for a specific reason, and the reason often has something to do with protecting some kind of hurt or fear or experience that we had early in life. And we picked up this habit, we picked up this direction, we picked up this thing in life to help us deal with what it was. And it'll never go away until we know what that was, until we trace the history back. And tell me if you need more of an example.
It can kind of help to know what caused it, but toughness, you have to deal with it. I mean, I was actually having a very interesting discussion this morning in Rav Haber's Tzidkas Atzadik shir, and we were talking about how the Aveira is not part of you; it's just something that that's attached to you, and it's something that you can ultimately break free from. I had a question about that, because, like, I've seen stats about recidivism, particularly for sexual predators, and the stats are not good. It's like you can, with all the best intentions in the world, if somebody is a pedophile, it's like a pedophile for life. It's like an alcoholic, I mean, and these can be the nicest people in the world in every other respect, but they've just got this one little thing about it, that they like to molest people, and it's like, and that's what help me as a psychologist. Help me to understand, like, what is the thing. Perhaps it's a general question of addiction, or like. But if somebody has a challenge like that, how can they get over it, and how do you relate to people who have these challenges? I mean, it's like such a massive question about this. For somebody who finds themselves in a situation where they're addicted, or if they're whatever it is.
So I got an interesting phone call just a few weeks back from a friend of mine who sometimes collects money for different causes. And he said to me, I have a neighbor and they're on the brink of divorce, and I'm collecting money for them to go to therapy, And so I said, have they been to therapy before? He said, yeah, but like not long enough, or it wasn't good enough, or it didn't, whatever. I said, how long have they been married for? So he said, 18 years. So I said, do they want therapy? So he said, not at the moment, but I'm hoping that I can talk them into it. So I said to him,
"You got to do one thing first. You got to get the will before you can collect the money."
It's an interesting, approach. But he cares about his neighbor, and he doesn't want them to get divorced. They have a number of kids, ranging from 15 to 19 or something like that. And I said to him, how do you know that divorce is not the best option for them?
That was the question on my mind.
And he went, what? What do you, like, what do you mean? Like, divorce is terrible, and it's true. It's true. We're also not Catholic.
Yeah.
Right? We believe that divorce is a tool for when it's needed. Rav Shalom Arush, has an amazing piece on divorce where he says it's a really bad idea because, it leaves you with all the problems and no reason to heal anything. And for the most part, I'm a big fan of making things work over divorce. And I often see divorce, and I would say the same thing about, when clients come to me, should they disconnect from their family? It's an amputation, right? Amputation is never good, but it's sometimes necessary. And but he was shocked by my response, and what I said to him was, I said I don't specialize in couples therapy. I do some of it, but I know that that over time, pain accumulates. Pain accumulates, and the more pain that there is in that relationship, the harder it is. There's a lot more to sort through before you can fix things. And if you give me, sometimes we have these cases that come along where, Hochster and Kala, they got married, they've been married 3 weeks and they're, reaching out for a divorce already, 6 months, a couple's been struggling for 2 years, right? Or my favorite cases, which I have some, when people come to me before, while they're dating or when they're engaged, before they're married. And there's so much amazing work that we can do there. But there's a certain point where the amount of pain that has built up makes it very, very difficult to deal with the issue. And I would say that with any problem, okay? When we come to a place where a guy is caught for molestation, okay, it's generally not his first time. It's not the first year we're coming to it and we're like, this is new, how do we fix it?
Yeah.
But there's a life of stuff that's been going on, right? And it's not unlikely that he was possibly molested when he was a child too, right? Now, if you give me a child who's been molested, 6 months ago, or a week ago, we can start to work on it. We can heal, If you don't heal that, the patterns that develop so they protect themselves, and then they use them over and over again, creating, neurological loops in the brain and creating behaviors and behavior patterns that, like everything in life, like why can't I, what are the rates of people at age 50, who learn a new language fluently? Not very high.
Yeah, your neurological pathways are kind of already...
So the brain has a lot of plasticity when we're young, it has a lot of plasticity when an issue is new. But when you take an issue and if somebody was sexually abused, it's not just gonna linger in a part of their mind and not manifest, and then one day they just, attack somebody. There's emotional systems, there's cognitive systems, there's behaviors, there's, the way that they look at the world and experience things, the way that they relate to, to friends and develop relationships, all of it, becomes skewed. And the longer, so if they were molested at age 7 to age 9, and now they're 36 years old, right? And there have been a lot of people involved, and we're going, why are recidivism rates so bad? The answer is,
because you got it too late. It's
not a new problem.
Yeah.
How long does it take somebody who's been smoking for 40 years to heal their lungs? Right? But if you catch it early, it's still challenging. It's still really painful. But but then you don't get them cycling into that place where they just harden over time with behaviors that are horrible because they help them to cope with what the real problem is that was never dealt with, and sometimes, and unfortunately, today we have, it's so difficult because, the access of a lot of really horrible things on the internet is so easy that sometimes it's a kid who's molested, but sometimes these days it's just a kid who stumbled into these things, or had a class on the birds and the bees and was curious and didn't know where to go for questions, and it's 7 or 8 years before they come to me. It's 7 or 8 years before anybody knows, and they can still heal from it. But the longer it goes and the more parts of your life that it affects, the harder it is to change
that. So that puts a lot of perspective on it, because I was just wondering how.
And it's the same thing. It's the same as the boy, the boy with the ball, right? There's a long story, and emotions can get attached very quickly, right? And so everybody has, everybody has a story, and like you were saying, not, it's hard to express it. I mean, I just started about a year ago writing articles, and I've been a psychologist now for about 10 years, and I'm writing articles about myself, really for myself, that I sometimes share with people, learning things about myself, understanding my own story, and I teach this, I do this with people, and yet it's still hard to go, into myself, and to say, wow, that was weird. Why did I respond in that way? Just to give you the last article that I just wrote, which I, just in the final stages of editing, it's about this past Pesach, and this, kind of habit I have of, for the month of Nisan, trying to speak to people to figure out how to create, like a really kadosh seder. Sounds like a great goal. It is a great goal. But it can come from unrealistic expectations about what does kadosh mean? What does holy mean? And sometimes when we strive for great holiness, we lose what's in front of us. We lose, sight of what's on the ground. We lose sight of our spouses or our children. For me, this year it was a big win that I was able to shift that focus and to.
What changed?
It's funny, actually. What changed this year was I didn't get any good answers from anybody, and I didn't know how to create spirituality. I didn't know how to create something sublime. So, and this is sort of maybe a longer story, but really one focus that I've had, in the last couple of years that I've been working on is what I call back to basics. Is not reaching for grand spiritual heights. And maybe there's a place for that, but I'm not ready for that. And anybody out there who is, amazing, and I'm coming to meet you once I get there. But back to basics, because the Torah's messages, and this is, let me maybe frame it like this. Histakel baraiso bari alma. Hashem looked into Torah and created the world. And because of that, I believe that the same principles of the Torah work in the world, right? And if I'm careful to discipline in my health, I will live longer. Not 100, not, I don't know.
Statistically speaking.
Right? If I'm careful about my relationships will be healthier. If I'm, if I'm, any area that you're careful in, it works out better. And if you're not, and so, am I careful with my health? Am I careful with what I eat? Am I careful with, exercising? Am I careful with my sleep? I mean, there's such a pull to you should be doing more things and not sleeping, and it's that's actually a really bad idea, or maybe it has its place, but it needs to be thought out, how you do it and when you do it, where you do it, and finding that balance. And when you can shift the focus to okay, this Pesach is going to be me and my kids and whoever I'm inviting, whatever. And, I have one kid who's learning how to read, and it's hard when people interrupt, him. And can I create the space for him to be able to read? And my kid who likes to run around and be wild, right? Do I have the walnuts in their shell that he can smash them all over the place? And kind of the little things of appreciating, what there is, and looking, because I think my role in life is based on what Hashem gave me, what's in front of me. And so many of us, we're running around to, shiurim, or we're learning at night and we have chavrusas, we go to shiurim, but is my marriage working? My wife and I have had the same argument, once a week for the last, 12 years, you've been going to night seder for 12 years. could that have time been used to heal your relationship? Like the Torah is supposed to be Hora, it's supposed to be guidance, it's supposed to be something that's transformative and changes our life. It's supposed to be something that, that not only changes our life and our family's life and our nation's life, but it changes the world. And that's why my own spiritual journey became so much stronger when I went out in the world, because I was like, a lot of what I was seeing was that these principles are just coming from the Torah, and they can take any person, a person who's in prison, and they can turn their life around. I know there's a guy in Mishkafim, Joey Rosenfeld, who I believe he worked in the prisons in Chicago, and he talks about the tshuva movement he started with non-Jews in the prison system in Chicago. And the Torah is significant, and it changes our lives. And just going to a shiur, and I learned, and getting schar in a bank, and that isn't changing me, that isn't altering me, that isn't dealing with what is my avoda, and what's not, sometimes, what is my avoda? List your 4 biggest challenges in your life. That's your avoda. I overeat. I'm always tired. I yell at my kids too much. Right? So look through the Torah. The Torah has stories about these things. The Torah has, and knowing what to apply where is complicated. But there should be a Seder where you take your problems to the Beis Medrash, and you open up a Sefer, and you look for the answers that change your life. And that's my...
Now, that's an interesting approach. I'm going to push back a little bit and say
Please.
We've got the thing is that even like total Rishayim will find justification for what they do.
Uh-huh.
I mean, you've got we've got people who are nominally Torah observant,
Yeah.
and who do who act and talk and in the most horrible ways,
Yeah.
and in their minds they've got a justification from the Torah why it's allowed, why it's actually a mitzvah.
Uh-huh.
And we have that. I mean, that's cognitive dissonance and what's it? A confirmation bias. These are things that apply to every human being,
Uh-huh.
except
Absolutely.
for the two of us, obviously. No, but it applies to every human being.
Right.
And how do you know in yourself when you're if you're actually being sincere about your thing? Because when you're being insincere, it feels the same as when you're being sincere, doesn't it?
No.
When if you find a justification,
No.
and you say, this is why it's actually a mitzvah for me to do it, and it feels exactly the same as if you actually found a genuine cause. But
I'm going to push back on that. I'm going to say that I disagree. I think if you lie to somebody, right? Once you've lied to somebody a million times, like it just rolls off your tongue, and there's nothing, it's automatic. But the first time you lie to somebody, or even intimacy, and I don't even mean it between like husband and wife. When you're two people in a room and you sit with somebody, right, and you talk about things, if you're honest with yourself, it feels, it feels what's true feels true. And you kind of need the space, and that's sort of what therapy is, and for some people it might be hisbodedus, for some people it might be journaling, but if you sit with yourself and talk it out loud, right, what is true and what's not true becomes very clear. When you're in the heat of the moment, it's very not clear.
Mm-hmm.
But
you're saying
after
that you have to remove yourself from the situation, and
speaks for myself. I'm overstimulated, so much of the time.
Mm.
But when I go and I sit down with with my diary and I write in my diary, or I sit down and type up something to reflect, or I talk with somebody with the purpose of finding the truth, it becomes very quickly clear what's true and what's not true. And it's interesting. I'll tell you an idea that I've toyed with, and I've toyed with starting an honesty group, bringing 2, 3, maximum 4 guys together who are interested in truth, who are interested in being honest with themselves, which requires being vulnerable, because if I admit that I'm doing something wrong, like, that's not so comfortable. And I've a little bit tried to like hint the idea to people, and people have never really come back to me, because it's really, it's scary to be completely honest, and it's not just like honest, not honest.
And like,
there's a lot of layers that have to be.
Confessional guys going to sit down in the group and say, well, actually, I've got this thing about little children, and like.
So there's issue 1, which is like AA does this, and they'll have where you can come as an observer, where you can come and not say anything and see other people do it and kind of get used to the concept of people sharing. And over time, people get used to it, and it's tremendously powerful. And the networks and the relationships and the ability to be honest and to say the truth is life-changing. It's life-changing.
And this is exactly what I don't know if you heard my podcast with Rabbi Bokatz. Number 4. It's worth listening to. He shared his own journey of alcoholism, and going to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings and meeting these different people who come from all sorts of walks of life. And in that room, it's like everyone is completely open and vulnerable, and the most spiritual people in the world are the people in AA. He says he's just never had any such spiritual experiences in Yiddishkeit as he's had in AA. Yeah.
I recently read an article by Robert Fulghum. I don't know if you know, he's famous for he has a bunch of books that are fantastic. His most famous book is Everything I Need.
Who?
Fulghum. Yeah. His book is called Everything I Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. It's a fantastic book. My favorite is called Uh-Oh, but this was, I think, his most recent book, or one of the most recent ones he wrote. It's called What on Earth Have I Done? And so he has a chapter in it called Bizarre Thoughts. And he basically says that like he's not a big fan of small talk. So he's always coming up with questions to like actually have real conversations with people. So he says one of the questions that he sometimes says is, would you share a bizarre thought with me? And I'll share one with you. And the guy's like, what? And then they like think about it, and then they're like, but he's willing to do it too. And he said a lot of times people will share. And so he puts down a list of, some of the things that, people shared with him. And one of the things, he has a very funny quote from a psychiatrist. He doesn't say who it is, but he said the psychiatrist told him something like that everybody's crazy and sane people. What's the quote? Sane people are the ones who know how to keep it under wraps. Something like that. And we all have lots of parts of ourselves, and there's no question that the human soul has the capacity of the greatest good in the world and the biggest destruction, and you and I are both human beings, and that's if you don't accept that, and so there's all kinds of things that we all have thought or done, and but being able to create a structure where how deep do we go? How truthful are we? What are we allowed to talk about? What are we not? And the things that we say could be scary for one another. And if somebody walks in and says, I did something to a little boy once, what do we do with that? What do we do with that? And does that belong in the group? Does it not belong in the group? But imagine, if we can create a group where there's real honesty. And I think my original place where I got the idea for this, there was a book by Rabbi Lopiansky called Ben Torah for Life. which I enjoyed thoroughly. It totally wasn't a book for me, in terms of, it was for people who've been in their yeshiva the whole life and leave because they have to get a job and they feel like a horrible person. And so he's saying, brings like quotes from all the Gedolim saying like, actually what you're doing is part of Torah and is the way.
It just drives me mad that person should ever have to think something like that.
So whatever, but it brings up a lot of good conversations.
Yeah.
The reason I'm bringing it up at this moment, we could talk about that too, but is at the end he talks about that that in his yeshiva, which I think is in Washington, Washington D.C., I think. There were a couple of guys who asked him to do like the guys who had moved from being in the yeshiva to the kollel, they just got married, and they wanted him to start a Shalom Bayis thing, and he created this like Shalom Bayis workshop where they could actually pick a topic and be honest about like what issues were coming up, and for it to be a chabura of working on midos, a chabura of working on, and he says it was like transformative, and it's now gone a couple of generations down, in terms of people doing it. But such a powerful concept, and bringing women and girls are better at organizing themselves to actually do things, but and having deeper conversations too. But to bring men together, and to work on our midos, to be honest with what we're really struggling with, because most people only have a couple of really big problems going on in their life. And if you fix those 3 or 4 things, a lot of research is trying to figure out, what percentage does this factor affect something, and what percentage does this factor, right? And if you end up with, this problematic behavior is 30% this, 5% this, 5% this, 5% this, 5% this. So if you target the 30%, you're going to make you're going to get the biggest, bang for your buck in terms of impact. And so if we could be honest about the 3 or 4 biggest things in our lives and work on those instead of hiding them under the closet, we all have, we all have our insecurities, we all have our weaknesses. You can read my articles if you want to know what mine are. But if we worked on that, I think that honesty allows us to be transformative because so much of culture is more about what things look like than what things are. But if we actually focus on what things are, we could strengthen, our relationship with our spouses, which is like the core, and then our families.
Perhaps a good way to frame it is like, if you want to get fit, you got to go running.
Yeah.
If you want to get strong, you got to do gym.
Right.
And if you want to like keep yourself on a spiritual even keel or in a positive growth direction, you need to put things in your life that are going to push you in that direction. Yeah.
And they're usually the hardest things to work on. I don't know where I heard this metaphor once of, talk about the elephant in the room, like there's a bunch of people stuck in a room because there's an elephant blocking the door, and they're all like sticking their hands out the door going, hello, someone get us out of here. And like, the problem is not getting it out of there. The problem is there's an elephant in your room, but it's hard. Like, it's really, it's really hard, to be honest. And there was a poem that was amazing. If I can share the name of it. Something like, please hear what I'm not saying, or something like that. It's an incredible poem that like talks about, our rich ability as human beings to hide the issues that we need to deal with most. And if we can make that the focus of what we do, and where this comes out tremendously, like hurtful, where I see it, I had a client a number of years ago that that his relationship with his spouse was really problematic. Spouse probably had a personality disorder. Children were very, very much damaged by it. But the kids couldn't go for therapy because they wouldn't be able to get a shidduch until after they get divorced. After they get divorced, so then there's a machlokas whether they're a better candidate if they are in therapy or if they're not into therapy. But that's crazy, and it's interesting. There was, I don't really want to give details because this, I guess it's not Lashon Hara because there was a book that was published, whatever. There was a book that was published that found its way to our base medrash, and it was talking about dating. And one of the things that it said was that shadchan is a Rashi Tevis for sheker, dover, kesev, notel. And I laughed at it. I was like, that's funny. But then he went to go on to quote different people who said that this is a chiyuv, and that somebody quoted that if there's no shakranos in your thing, then I promise you your shidduch won't go through. And I brought it to Rabbi Haber, who said it's possible that the person he's quoting said it, but the person who's writing this took it out of context. That's like it wasn't a serious comment. And but what's behind that concept is we're all supposed to be perfect. If I have a family, and if I have an issue in the family, nobody's going to marry me. So
that's real.
Everybody ends up lying.
Yeah.
And then the only thing that happens is now we have these blind marriages where you get to find out what your spouse is hiding, after you're married.
But that's probably one of our biggest malaises as a from community.
Yeah.
Is the number of rules and the things that you can say and cannot say, and the appearances. We've become, a society of chitzonius, of you have to look the part, and you've got to put up this pretense of being something that you're not. And I'm not saying I don't want to be misconstrued and say be yourself. Be yourself is bad advice. You should be a better version of yourself. That's what you're aiming for. But
I can tell you that I grew up on Shabbos wearing like a jacket, and like in yeshiva I went to yeshiva kotel where they didn't. And here I've mostly, except for sometimes occasional simchas or occasionally I stop wearing a jacket. And part of this, and I don't know if this is the right thing, is two parts of it. One, I'm a little bit waging a war against the chitonios. It's just like, and the other part is I'm not as good a parent when I'm overheated. Right? And so those it's a real thing.
That is a much better argument. The second one is a much better reason.
Well, I could still wear it for davening or whatever. And, somebody else said to me, like, what are you, you're taking your own mishigas at Shabbos expense. I'm not sure what's right or not. But the point is that we've it's so much about what things look like. It's so much about, I mean, and I'm not free from it. I remember one time, we were going out and my kid's going outside and he didn't have his kippah on. I'm like, get your kippah before you go. And it's like, why do I care more about if ever? I mean, normally wears it, but there was a part of me that cared more about him wearing his kippah when he's going outside than when he was inside, because people will see, right? And we're so, and it's not a bad thing. I often say this, that caring about other people and what they think is a spectrum.
Yeah.
And there's each side. There's the side of somebody who doesn't care what anybody thinks, no matter what, and in that we have serial killers and sociopaths and narcissists, and the other side is caring so much that if they all jump off the cliff, I'm going with them, right? And in life, you have to you have to find your middle ground. Sometimes you shift a little bit too much to one side, and sometimes you shift a little bit too much. But when our system becomes that everything is lying, and I went to the author of that book and I said, I meet people who can't go to therapy because, they're afraid that there's it's about what it looks like. Meaning, who would say that therapy is not a good thing? I mean, there are bad therapists out there, and there are But
I think what there are two different types of people who go to therapy. And this is from me as a non-medical professional. You can probably, I'm just going to guess and you tell me how accurate I am.
Yeah.
They're the kind of people who go to therapy because they see that there's something they need to work on. They need somebody external to give them the tools to deal with it and to get better.
Yeah.
Okay? And then the kind of people who go to therapy because they just need somebody to talk to. Mm-hmm. And they're not looking to actually make a difference to their lives. They just it's just cathartic. I need to talk, and somebody needs to hear my tales of woe, and they're not getting anywhere. Now that second kind of person, you can tell without knowing that they're going to therapy. but I mean, perhaps that's where a stigma of therapy comes from. Is like if you're kind of that second group.
There's an old joke that 10% of people come to therapy because they want to change, to figure out how to change, and 90% of people come to therapy to figure out what to do about the person in their life who won't change. What I often say is, and maybe I'll quote this from Rabbi Jonathan Rieti. He said,
Jonathan who?
Rieti.
Don't know.
Originally British master educator who's been working in the States for many years now. Phenomenal. And so he says that there's only one kind of person who doesn't have problems. You know, kind of person?
Imaginary?
That's a good guess. So most people say somebody's dead, but
Golem.
How do we know? He said the only kind of person who doesn't have any problems is the kind of person you don't know very well.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much truth to that. And so we all, the nature of being a human being is to struggle. And let me say this, because this is like really important. I want to in the last couple of years, I started reading the Torah, just Pashut Pshat. Okay? Hashem created Gan Eden, and he put Adam in it. How long did he last?
Not even a day.
Not even a day, an hour, right? Sorry. Not even an hour. Not even 1 hour, I think he lasted, right? Mm-hmm. And messed up, kicked out. He had 2 children. One killed the other, right? And God comes to him, and he first tries to lie about it. Right? That doesn't help your situation usually, especially if the person you're talking to is God. And then he says, and then when God
says, well, it's your fault. You gave me this woman.
So Adam, right, blamed Chava, which parenthetically, Moshe Weinberger says that the goal, that the avodah of men for all of time is to take responsibility. He said most people either say it's my fault, I'm evil, and then give up on doing anything because they're evil, or say it's somebody else's fault, it's not my fault, and don't do anything. And he said the job of all men in this world is to take a responsibility without incriminating yourself. I messed up, but I'm not bad, and it's my responsibility to fix it, which is a fine line.
Yeah.
But Cain comes, Hashem says, comes to Cain, and Cain says, is this sin too great to bear? Right? And if you were God, what would you say?
Well, that's an unfair question. if I'm God, is my sin too great? You just killed somebody.
Yeah, I would have said no, we're starting over. Let's. This is not a good start. Cut. But Hashem says, it depends what you do with this. Depends. L'pesach chatas rovates.
Yeah, he said it before he killed
Hevel.
That pasuk comes from before he killed Hevel.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
You sure? I think it comes up after. We can check it after.
I'm pretty confident on this one.
But either way,
it was this was after they made their offerings, and Cain was upset that his sacrifice wasn't accepted, and Hashem said to him, this whole what you said about the Cain race. By the way, that pasuk is exactly parallel to what he said to Chava, that Chava and her husband and Cain and sin. There's a parallel in the pasukim, which is an interesting one, but for another time.
So we can check it out. But either way, if one brother killed if one was thrown out of Gan Eden and the next generation one killed another, I would say like, let's tweak this. Let's do something differently. But God just lets it go. And the point is that, like, to me, that God's showing us we're a really chaotic species, with potential of all the evil in the world. And God says, well, that's okay. We'll just, try to fix on it, try to repair on it. And so, and so we're all flawed. We're all have difficulties. We all have struggles, whether it's jealousy or anger or fears or, and generally it's what we do about, those things. But I often say that there are what differentiates people that come to therapy from people who don't is three things. Do they have the honesty to recognize there's a problem?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have the ability to admit it to another human being, mm-hmm. and the desire to do something differently? And if you give me a person who has all three of those, which is usually why they show up, their life is very likely to change in dramatic ways. And not everybody can do that for lots of reasons, but the people who come to me, they have those three, and doesn't mean they can change everything. Doesn't mean they're willing to be honest about everything. And sometimes it takes 6 months of dealing with like small issues before they're willing to talk about what, is the kind of deeper issue. And that's okay. And that's actually not bad. My wife is a physical therapist. And one of the things that physical therapy, half the job is not rehabilitating, it's making sure somebody doesn't rehabilitate too fast because they're going to hurt themselves. Right? You break your leg, and or this happens with sports players all the time. They get on the field too quickly, and the second time you damage it, it's really bad. And so healing from trauma, healing from things, as helpful as it is to bring these things up, it has to be done in the right context, at the right speed, in a way that you're prepared for. And you need the tools to be able to deal with what comes up when you actually talk about the truth. And so, sorry about that. And so it needs to not just happen, but it has to happen at the right pace, at a pace that healing can happen. And so, so those are, that's what I see that brings people into therapy, and that's why people in therapy succeed, and that's why, sometimes people ask me, like, how could you like your job? It's listening to people's problems all the time. The answer is, I love my job. I enjoy almost every minute of my job, because people move forward, people make progress. And, you can have people who start in really deep and dark places, who feel very alone and detached and are, panic attacks or don't know how to move forward and are really stuck and have been stuck in places for, a long time, who can little by little come out and experience life totally in a new way. And, and it's such empowering to see people change, and it motivates myself to keep working on myself too, which is also part of the process. So one conversation we were having before, that's been also a very important topic to me, is the importance of my own place, my own emotions in the Torah. When we talk about B'sein Chalkeinu, B'sar Secha, and I remember as a kid, sometimes sitting in school and trying to understand, the Gemara or whatever, and thinking like, these were geniuses who spent years, and had the most incredible mentors, and like, what do I have to add to that, conversation? Like, why am I, why am I learning? What am I supposed to be adding? And I heard, just to share a beautiful Devar Torah, I heard this from Rabbi Steining, he was the Rav of the Young Israel of Bayside, which is where my father grew up. He said probably the most beautiful Sheva Brachas Devar Torah that I ever heard. That that he said when we he said, we know that some of the things that they had in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, where do they come from? So we know that when Avram and Sarah had their own tent, so there were a couple of miracles that would happen. There's Ner Dolek, there was a bracha in the Isa, right? And then we actually see these, brachos, later on in the Beis Hamikdash, right? So we had the Lachem Apanim, which was warm. We had the Ner that was Dolek there, which is the Ner Ma'aravi. And so one of the things that he said that was really so beautiful is when we talk about building a Mayat Ne'eman B'Yisrael, that Hashem, when he saw the relationship between Avram and Sarah, he said, that's how I want to pattern my home, And so he said, the bracha that I want to give you, and he said, is not is not that your home should just be like the Avos, but it should be so beautiful that Hashem should look at it and say, I want to make my house after that. And there's a place where who we are is supposed to be, the Torah is supposed to manifest itself within us. And and as I was talking before, there's taking our issues, our struggles, and using the Torah to understand who it is, and then through that we become something else. And I think that affects, that affects the world in a way that Hashem looks at that, and Hashem sees the beauty in that. And so I think that who we are affects the Torah that we can create. Who we are affects the Torah that we learn, the Torah that we gravitate to. And this is what you were, talking about. There's, coming from South Africa, right? You're experiencing something different, and you're like, this is.
And like every single human being is created differently, and our society tends to try and ram everyone into the same box and say, okay, square peg, round hole. Too bad, you'll all come out looking the same, and that's kind of what our chinuch systems are designed for, which is kind of tragic. But when we say ten chalken b'sorasech, I thought that was the direction that you were going to go. Is that like your chelek in Torah is like histakel be'araisa be'ara alma. Is like the Torah is it's not a scroll. It's not a body of knowledge. The Torah is like an all-encompassing thing, and we stick the label on it, and we kind of conflate the concept of the Sefer Torah with living a Torah lifestyle, and they mean different things. And like for somebody who is a Torah so umna so kind of person, they sit there and nothing else matters. They love the Torah. Mm-hmm. That is what they should be doing. Mm-hmm. But somebody who is a business mind and like he can't keep still, can't sit down in a base midrash, you should not be trying to staple him to the chair and say, no, you need to learn because that's what Torah people do. You're learning all the time. Everyone should have some learning in their life. You got to stay attached, but you've got to find your derech, and what you are pulled to, that is going to be your avodah.
I would actually I want to question that, and here I'm outside the psychology realm, so I'm not speaking from authority, but a question. But I would even like reverse that, like. If we have somebody who is a business personality, right? My younger brother, he used to go to school, go to camp every summer. My parents would send him with a little bit of money, and he would come back with 3 times as much. Whether he was selling grilled cheese sandwiches or trading Pokemon cards or whatever it was. He was always a business guy, and to this day he's in real estate development. But for the kids who are doing that, shouldn't school or yeshiva or beit medrash be a place that is, where the yeshiva has a business center where people start businesses and they learn business halacha in tandem with like starting businesses? And it was interesting because
that's not pushing back. That's agreeing with me.
I'm saying maybe. And I guess this is the question that I have. We talk about the importance of learning in Talmud Torah and Eged Kulam, but the reason that Talmud Torah is more that that learning is more important than doing is because it brings lidei maisa, right? So it's important because if you don't have the learning, you don't end up doing maisa. So you have to learn, but the goal is really the maisa. And so so our our schools should, in my perspective, I sometimes wonder even what the learning Torah itself without, I guess it's never without application. You're always living your life, but a life of Torah that's not towards towards creating something, and whatever you're creating, there's really halachos, and I remember. One of my first internships, I was worried that the hours were too low or something, and I ended up fixing the hours a little bit, making them a little bit higher than they were, and I was fortunate enough that my supervisor caught me, and it was an amazing thing. And he looked at me and he's like, "You're gonna get thrown out of somewhere. You deserve to," and he was right. And it never there was learning, and then there was work, and the base measures should be a place that trains us. For the world. I heard my Rebbe once say that when Yaakov Avinu was learning Hashem Ve'ever for those 14 years, what was he learning, right? As my Rebbe said, he was learning how to deal with other people, and he brings a cool reference for it, which he brings. I think Rashi. It says when Yitzchak sent Yaakov to Lavan. So he said, "Go to Lavan, the son of Besuel, and he lists all the relatives, and and Rashi says, I don't know why he's listing this again. We know who it is, and my Rebbe first brought a raya that you're allowed to bring your own shot, even if Rashi says I don't know, and then he goes on to say that when you're dealing in business with a crook. So when you write out your contract, don't just write Lavan, write Lavan, the son of Besuel, put in all the pratim. And so when he was going to Shem Ve'ever, he was sent on a mission by his father, given this direction, go there, study, prepare yourself, to be able to function, in the world. And so I sometimes wonder if our schools really, are they preparing us for life? Are they for the people who are going to do business? Are they teaching us business halachas? And for the kids who are going to, being health, talk about the health that comes in the Torah, like the Torah, and I guess the Torah you're not allowed to use it as a spade, but but shouldn't the way that we study it be in a way that's really practical, that sets us up for healthy relationships, healthy world, healthy, healthy everything. And isn't that what Torah is supposed to do? I don't, I struggle to understand what Torah just for Torah. Now, if you have a person who's sitting and learning Torah and he becomes the expert, now he can become a posek, and now all these questions come to him, and I think at one point Rabbi Haber had made a comment that he said that one of the reasons that we haven't seen as many Gedolim in this generation is because the way that people used to come up through the line, they would be the Rav of a community, they would get 1,000,000 shilas, and in doing that they would see, they would understand poor people, and they would understand divorces, and they would hear everybody's story, and that gave them the wisdom that as they learned the Torah, their Torah became mature in a way that their Torah was life-changing for the world. As opposed to if you just sit by yourself and learn, but you haven't talked to people who are dealing with,
You're coming up to the base midrash in the ivory tower the whole time.
Right, and especially I feel like so much here, as kids we always had extracurricular, and it was just about doing other things. And maybe my parents had more lofty perspective on it. But here in Eretz Yisrael, I feel like it's a small country, small people. Every talent you have has the capacity to serve Hashem and to build our people, to build our nation, to build our land, to be more beautiful and more amazing and more developed, and a place where the rest of the world sees it. And it changes them, and they come to us like they used to come to Shlomo Melech, and they said, "Wow, how did you create this?" And he used to give them the wisdom, and through that, it changed the world.
Yeah.
And I wonder if our Torah is doing that, or are we siloing it? There's Talmud Torah, and then there's everything else.
Right, and we kind of lost that extra
the integration of what it's really supposed to be, what it looks like, what it looks like when it's alive, and it takes a lot of you go learn a whole sugya, right? And then you try to do shluach hakein, and you're like, wait, but how do I do this? And how do I and then so you have to go back, and then you study again, and it's this dynamic between going back and forth between study and practice.
Yeah.
That develops
the whole person.
The whole person.
Yeah.
Yeah, an integrated person, and I feel like here in Ariel, kulam kadoshim, like everything here is kaddish. Every area is kaddish.
As you say, we have so much more potential to have a big impact because it's a new country, it's a new society, and especially with our influx of Anglo immigrants, I think we're bringing a huge amount of value to the table.
I think so. I think
it's a shame. We should see more and more growth in that.
And I think when we can tap into all the parts of ourselves, and when we can make everything kadosh, and when our learning becomes manifest in the way, in who we are, and in each of our activities, in a live and dynamic way. Maybe my brother, when a few times he did deals in school, they got caught and were like torn up, and he was like, I was trying to learn how to be a functioning human being, and they're just taking it away from me, and I do agree with the school that when kids starting businesses and taking advantage of one another, and but why shouldn't a yeshiva be a place to learn how to do business?
Yeah.
Why shouldn't a yeshiva,
The Rosh Yeshiva can also be based in and say, okay, you've got it, machlokes. That's
one of the things they thought about in the Beis Hamikdash was the Trumas Edeshin, who's taking out the garbage.
Yeah.
Right. Where is that in our where's that in our curriculum system? The kedusha of of cleaning up, of taking care of this. This guy walks around. I think his name's Gary.
Yeah.
Listening to music and picking up and what a kadosh, what a appreciation for this is our land. We want to keep it clean. We want it beautiful. We don't want garbage on our streets. We don't want garbage in our minds. We don't want garbage in the way that we speak, or in what we're producing. So maybe that's
And I think on that note, we'll close out. Thank you very much for a fascinating discussion. Okay.
Such a pleasure, and maybe to summarize everything in here you are giving people, a place to speak, to have their place in Torah, to have, to build in whatever area people are strong in, to bring that to light so that we as a community can benefit it, because every person has talents, and somebody once said to me, Christians have big buildings and small people. First thing, they're all flawed, and Jews have small buildings, with big people. And really, there's kedusha in every person, and the more that we bring it out, the more this country shines. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Where life takes a spin. Join the fun, let the talk begin. Hakol Sababa, where life takes a spin. Join the fun, let the talk begin.